Open source as we know it is under attack, and the answer is nowhere near as easy as you might think. Let's talk about it. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here and you love open source, make sure to leave a like and get subscribed. We're going to be going through the state of open source in 3D printing in 2023, an article put out by Mr. Joe Prusa himself, and then we're going to finish it up actually with somewhat of a reply from Bambu called Let the Arms Race Begin. Prusa is a company that is no stranger to open source. For those of you that don't know, they've been around for over a decade and being 100% open source. Now, mind you, companies that Prusa has acquired may not be 100% open source, but their desktop 3D printers are all 100% open source, as is their firmware, their slicer, everything that goes into it. And this means that they are giving out all of this code, knowledge, money that they've paid for in hope that it builds a better community. And as we can see, we got to make a few things clear from the start. They stand by their roots of open source and will continue to do so. Desktop 3D printers will always be open source, and they intend to continue publishing plastic parts along with firmware source codes. They will stay open to third-party component manufacturers, accessories, add-ons, and unofficial upgrades, which is awesome. Prusa Slicer will always be open source, which I love about that. And their investment in Prusa Slicer and firmware development will continue to be the same or higher level. This all means that the kind of movement that we expect from these firmwares, being that we get new firmware updates for the platforms often, that Prusa Slicer is constantly being modified and changed and made better, is something that doesn't change anytime soon. Now, as Prusa grows larger, if they don't increase their software and firmware development, maybe that does slow down a little bit, but they're committing to right now being the baseline, and I'm fine with this. This sets the stage because this article is a bit of a hard read, because as someone that has enjoyed open source for 15 years now, building 3D printers for quite some time, really enjoying the community around it, and seeing the way that the community has changed, I have some agreements with Joe here. Previously, everyone involved played by the same rules, and companies that didn't were outright boycotted to the point where they were forced to change or they would go out of business. I loved that. Nowadays, with companies like Creality and Creality Cloud, which we covered multiple videos of, we'll card that playlist so you guys can take a look, the community was outraged for 2 weeks. They made minimal changes, and to this day, you can still find parts on Creality Cloud that don't belong there. Why? Because they don't care, and the community doesn't care to hold them accountable for their actions. That sucks, because we need to, because if we don't, who will? Backing up a little bit, we can see that Prusa will always stand on the shoulders of people like Adrian Boy, the founder of RepRap, Alessandro Ralinucci, hopefully I got that one right, who's the original author of Slick 3R, Dave Bram, who's the original author of Cura, and Scott Latine. Scott, I hope I got your last name right, and many others. And at the very least, they all deserve public recognition and thanks whenever someone uses their work. They do. In fact, it's pretty much a requirement when you look at the GPL licenses that you must credit your work. It's like going to college and writing a paper. If you don't credit where you got your sources from, you're plagiarizing. But if you credit, now you've done research. And Prusa says right here, the open source movement relies on the fact that everyone involved plays by the same rules. It cannot be done without mutual respect, understanding, and a shared goal. When someone suddenly bends the rules for their own benefit or openly violates them, the community makes it clear that it won't stand for it. In the past, we've seen plenty of protests and boycotts that have forced even large companies to rethink how they treat open source heritage. But in recent years, I feel that the situation is changing. More and more companies are breaking and bending the rules, and the community is not nearly as resistant to their actions as it once was. After a minor internet storm, the situation calms down and the code remains closed, or only part of it is open. And after a few weeks, everybody forgets. Now, this might have something to do with how quick the news cycles have been ever since the dark days of the human malware, and even prior, where we've seen a resurgence or a renaissance. Can I say that in Florida still? We've seen a renaissance movement of 3D printing where there was a group of us that were just hanging out, really vibing, then human malware hit, and all of a sudden 3D printing went from here and it climbed a very steep vertical cliff to where it lands today, which is a much more household thing that people are starting to understand, but maybe not as household as some of us would like it to be, because people still don't know the effort that it takes to make stuff. You can't get a custom part made for your car for 50 bucks, I'm sorry. And Prusa's even been receiving information about companies that have started to apply for local patents on open source development and trademarks. You'd be surprised how many of them have Prusa in their name, about companies partially owned by state companies and institutions and using open source code in their closed systems, thus violating licenses. To me, the big problem that we have here is that there is no regulatory body around open source. You know what you can do if someone violates open source? Bad company. Don't do it again. You're a bad company. You should not be doing that. There's no way other than the name and shame that we tend to do these days, calling out the bad actors and hoping that the community riles up around us. That's all we can do, because otherwise our hands are completely tied, because there is no consequences for violating GPL. There's no regulatory body that keeps up with it. There's no policing of it. Lord have mercy, we don't want the American police system to be doing that. Those that follow the rules benefit and provide for their benefit for the community. Those that don't abide by the rules get all of the benefit, but give none of the feedback that is required, where if you produce a product that utilizes open source, you must too open source your product, which furthers development in the community. Prusa goes to state things like the Arachne engine for Cura that was brought into Prusa Slicer is completely because of open source. Things like the tree supports, organic supports are basically the same thing, that were pulled from Cura and adapted for Prusa Slicer. And even Bambu themselves have built Bambu Studio upon the wings of Prusa Slicer itself. It's very easy to find in the source code. Open source benefits everybody, but if people don't abide by those rules, it gets a bad taste for those that are abiding by the rules. Because why would a company like Prusa continue to want to remain open source when all they're really doing is helping their competition, literally giving them the recipe to compete and be able to undercut? Because guess what? Prusa doesn't manufacture overseas. Well, the overseas that most of us think of, right? They don't manufacture in China. They manufacture in the Czech Republic, in Prague. They pay livable wages to real people who love their jobs. And you don't necessarily find that in manufacturing facilities inside of China. Don't believe me? Look up Foxconn. But enough of that. Prusa and others have contributed so much to this community, things that the vast majority of people don't even know are Prusa things, such as the PCB heaters, removable print sheets, powder-coated PEI directly on metal, automatic mesh bed leveling using inductive probe, power panic, advanced thermal runaway protection, automatic skew axis calibration, sensorless homing, and much more. These are all open source things that Prusa themselves have developed and the rest of the community has benefited from. Very little are they ever either thanked or even properly given the credit that they are deserved. And thankfully, they would never consider patenting anything like that, which is good because, again, that furthers community development. But when we see companies that do hit the market that are fully closed source, that means that those developments that they've made, some of them on the backs of open source, right? Core XY, open source. Prusa Slicer, open source. A lot of these things are going to be open source. But when they choose to close source certain things and wall garden it, it does make this innovation system difficult. And one of the main goals for Prusa has always been to make their printers easy to maintain and modify, so people and companies can play and experiment with software and hardware. And they're thrilled to see that the amazing 3D printed modifications and third-party add-ons for their printers, with a nice example, which we will of course link to in that description down below. And one of the best things to see, and one of their greatest motivations, is when parents build 3D printer assembly kits with their kids, thus gradually learning how the machine works. That is why I recommend kit builds to people. While they will take a bunch of time, and that time has value and will likely not be worthwhile from a financial standpoint, from the ability of being able to fix and understand your machine better, there's no better crash course than putting together a Prusa, because their instructions are some of, if not the best on the market. You can call me a fanboy all you want, but until you've read the instruction manual for a Prusa, you really don't know what you're missing. It is legitimately well thought out with good, high quality pictures and all the little tips and tricks that you would need to make the build simple. While it won't take you a very short amount of time your first time, man, that second time goes through so much faster because all those little tips and tricks, they up here in the old noggin, and it actually makes maintaining your machine so much easier. Let's talk about the standard GNU GPL license. I agree. It is way too vague. It is way too oddly specific in some ways and has no means of having some sort of penalty should somebody violate it. It is literally a slap on the wrist, and you hope that you can get enough people to get an angry mob together of some sort to boycott a company. Might I remind you of Creality's issues, of G-Tech and how they stole things from Chuck Hellebuck, among many others. Those are the two that just came to mind instantly. And I didn't even make a list.
A list?
If I could make a list, we might be here all damn day. Because it's common and it happens all the freaking time. There's really no way to do it that doesn't cost a ton of money. And the hang printer guys know this. They had a company in the United States patent the idea of a hang printer. But this has been in open source in public domain for years. And the USPTO, the US Patent and Trademark Office, completely missed it, and they granted this patent. Well, that starts to get expensive because now the people that own the patent must, by law, go after the art that already exists, because now they own the rights to it. So now they have to go to court and prove who was first. And if there's one thing I know, who's on first gets really complicated.
Who is on first, Lou? What are you asking me for?
And if we don't further explain how these licenses work and what they mean, and put them out into broad spectrum terms that a layman like myself can understand, then realistically, the fact that many companies interpret open source licenses in their own way is part and parcel of the problem that we have. If we don't set a better understanding for how these licenses work, then we're really doomed for individual interpretation. I agree that there needs to be something done here to change this, but I don't necessarily know where to start. I would love to start a charge to move toward better understanding and better defining what open source looks like and how each of the licenses, including things like non-commercial. If we print a part and we use it on our YouTube channel and we make a little time lapse of it, I would consider that commercial use, but the vast majority of people don't. So we do make sure that if we are using parts on the YouTube channel that we have permission from the people that we get them from, or their licenses state that it's totally fine to use in a commercial atmosphere. Now, I might make 3 pennies worth of ad revenue from it, but under technical legal definition, that is still a commercial purpose. We are using it for advertising. But that's a really fine line. If I don't make any profit from it, if our expenses exceed that of our revenue, does that still make it commercial? Or does that make it nonprofit? I don't know. There are obviously a lot of things to discuss here. Maybe this is a good topic for a future podcast. We might have to bring back David Stein. That is an old podcast episode, but I will card to it so you guys can take a look. One of my favorite lawyer ones that we've had. We should probably have David back on because I think it is valuable to talk more about this since it is in the cultural zeitgeist once again. And regarding things like using it, but then not contributing, again, if there's no consequences to not following open source, I don't necessarily blame these companies for not doing it. If there's no consequence to stealing from a store, people are gonna steal. The only reason people don't steal, or the vast majority of people don't steal, because there are consequences that come with stealing, like police and jail and judges and lawyers. And so unless there are consequences, there's really nothing that we can do about it. Now, my proposition here is we have to better define it, and we should look at some sort of regulatory body of sort. And I don't know how we could implement this, but something to where a organization would go in and certify something as truly open source. And if it's not, provide something to the company where they could say, this is what you need to become open source. Problem is, this can't be free. There's no way for it to be. These people need to get paid to do their work. So who's going to pay for that? Well, the companies that are violating open source certainly aren't because they don't care. They're obviously violating open source. If you've got a good idea, let me know in those comments. This is a confusing one, and it's frustrating because the entire community as a whole suffers when open source isn't followed. We benefit because of open source, because it enables companies to share together. You might think that Prusa and Bambu hate each other, and I'm sure there is some animosity, but don't forget, the step file import that you have on Prusa Slicer is directly ported from Bambu Studio, and they give credit to it. That's what open source is about. It is about working together to collectively bring up the community. As my buddy Pooch and my buddy Nero say, a rising tide lifts all benchies, even though they don't float. All of these points also imply possible corrective actions. The question is how to achieve them while still remaining open source and supporting the community. Some time ago, Joe started thinking about a new license to address these issues more clearly, so he put together a few working points that they would like to see in such a license. With our podcast with David Stein, again, we'll link to that in the description down below if you want to listen to it. He talked all about the oil and gas industry, how for them to build their businesses, they must patent things, but to keep the industry moving forward, they must license those. So what they do is they choose to have incredibly low cost license fees, things like $1. But what that does is it allows them to license out that IP to others so that they can continue moving forward as well, but still maintain that asset on their books. Remember, patents, copyrights, trademarks, those are assets for the book of your company, right? Those go into what is owned by your company. And especially a patent has a fair bit of value to it. It can actually be the entire basis upon what a company is built upon. I'm currently working on some intellectual property that I'm looking to patent, and it's a lot of money. We're looking at no less than $15,000 and 2 years, and that's assuming nobody challenges it. If we get a challenge, that's 100 grand gone. Money that I don't have. I like the idea that if a company stops producing something, their non-commercial license vanishes, because if you do still need components, yeah, it's good to have a means to obtain new ones, whether it's from somebody else or you make it yourself. I don't know about the production of near exact one-for-one clones for commercial purposes not being allowed. That does kind of undercut open source as it stands. If they wanted to do something like, let's say, clone a Mark III's. Let's be clear, FizeTech has done this, and I happen to have a FizeTech Mini clone, and we're going to be comparing it to one of my Prusa Minis, so stay tuned, because we're going to see if there is a value to buying a clone versus buying it from Prusa Direct. But it is a problem because that money is directly taken from Prusa. Prusa did all of this work, or whomever did all of this work, and they got nothing to show for it. FizeTech just took all the base files and said, you print your own parts, here are the hard parts you can't make yourself, enjoy your kit, have a nice day. And they're charging pennies on the dollar for it. But because they didn't have to maintain all of that extra labor, the beta testing, and all the production for it, their costs are lower, and therefore they can sell it for less and still make a profit. It sucks. But as Joe says, he wants to use the article to start a discussion. So Joe, if you're watching, we should have a discussion, and I would invite you to come on a podcast with me, and let's talk all about open source and what can we, honest to God, do to solve these problems, because man, it pisses me off as much as it likely, and from what I can see here, really does piss you off. But it is as frustrating for me as it is for any other person here. I know for you, as someone that owns a company that is directly being damaged by some of the bad actors in open source, that you want to find a better way. I do too, because I want to see some of these problems go away, but I don't know if I have a better option. I'm hoping that maybe we get some good opinions down in those comments. I would love to talk to you on a podcast. I think that would be a great episode for us to do. So if you're watching, slide into those DMs, you know how to do it. But I do believe it's time for us to sit down and come up with a better version of open source. So maybe it's open source light, or excuse me, open source S plus max gen 2.3. Remember, this industry started because open source was required for it to start. And it was a big middle finger to Stratasys and their patents. And Adrian Boyer, man, you too, love to have you on a podcast talk all about the early days of RepRap. That would be fun. I don't know if there is one good answer. I think the one good answer that we have is let's all just abide by the rule of don't be a dick. And I think at that point, we move in the right direction. But Prusa's not the only one to put out an article about this. Earlier today, for me, Sunday for you guys, Bambu put out something. This one's an interesting one. They start off by congratulating Prusa for the release of the MK4 as well as the XL, and they say that nobody understands better than them the difficulty of taking a brand new design from concept to mass production, especially considering the supply chain challenges in the past few years. That is a very absolute statement. If there's one thing that I know, only a Sith deals in absolutes. There could be some translation things going on here, because realize Bambu is a Chinese company, so this might be Chinese translation. It could also be AI. I honestly don't know. I've never talked with anybody except for Will from Bambu, so. And they say that at Bambu, they're curious, a bit concerned, and mostly excited. Many people dismiss Creality's low-cost products, but they want to say that to some extent, Creality and Ender 3 have shaped 3D printing ecosystem, expanded the user base, and enriching everything from accessories to models, and even the supply chain. Many of us, whether Creality users or competitors, have benefited from Creality. But remember, Creality stole things from Prusa and made the Ender 3, which is an i3 variant. You have to look back at the history to understand that all Creality did was just dump the price to the floor. They said, how cheap can we make something, and let's put it out there. Nothing drives industry development better than an arms race between manufacturers. And in the April breeze, we can already smell the intensifying arms race to come. I totally agree with that statement. It's true. Nothing drives development better than companies directly competing. And guess who wins? Us, the consumers. So regarding open source, competition, and patents. Where there's competition, there are winners and losers. There is no way to sugarcoat it. They've read Prusa's latest blog post on open source, which we just went through, of course, and they can understand the concerns, frustration, anxiety, and a touch of anger expressed therein. While understanding the feeling, countless failures, efforts, and expenses lie between each new feature. We've established an intellectual property department, applied for necessary patents, and prepared to use legal weapons to ensure that we are in fair, competitive environment. Boy, howdy, that is a dangerous sentence. To be clear, just putting patents on something is ridiculous. And Bambu, hi, Creality just launched the K1, which is effectively a Bambu clone. And for those of you that are looking to get a K1, might I remind you about Creality Cloud, its ridiculous IP issues, and if you think I have problems trusting Bambu, don't even ask me about my trust for Creality, because it's not there. Through social media, they can sense for some reason that Josef, that's not the right spelling of his name either, is not too fond of Bambu. What they want to tell Joe is Bambu and Prusa are actually on the same side. Are you though? Because if you were, you wouldn't maintain encryption on your log files that I still have a $500 bounty to the first person that can provide me with perfectly cracked log files. I will provide you with the log files from one of my Bambu printers, and you are welcome to take all the effort that you need to crack it. $500 to the first person that can crack the encryption on a Bambu log file, because they say they have a privacy policy where they don't collect all this information, but yet they're hiding the information that they collect. If Bambu is so concerned about what they're collecting and people that are seeing it, why should we not be concerned about that? Because I am. I want to know when I'm sending Bambu, because until I can see it, they ain't getting a damn thing from me. So no, Bambu, you and Prusa are not on the same side. Prusa is 100% open source, where Bambu is pretty much all closed source. In fact, broken parts, you have to hope that those parts are in stock, or you're out of luck. Printers are having random problems. We have an individual who's in the comments of a lot of our videos talking about how he's got printing issues where circles end up getting squished, and Bambu is doing nothing about it. They're saying there's nothing wrong. Clearly there's something wrong. Other users are not having the issue. Some are, some aren't. So don't tell me you're on the same side. You're not. And while they both invest heavily in innovation and push the industry forward, I disagree with that. They do invest heavily in innovation. Bambu does not push the industry forward. They're not sharing anything. That's not pushing the industry forward, but they are bringing more people to the plate. Let's be real. Bambu has been one of the biggest successes in 3D printing since the Creality Ender 3 came out. Now, don't get me wrong. Prusa has made amazing moves, but the amount of hype that came around Bambu, I have never seen another company get. Not in this industry. That is good. I will give them that. A lot of innovation, and they've certainly converted a lot of users to moving into the 3D printing space. So, hat is off to Bambu for that. And in the next few months, the number of X1 clones may be as numerous as the i3. I firmly 100% promise you, I'll put 20 bucks on it, that is not going to be a thing. Creality themselves have over 4 dozen i3 clones. Just Creality. I don't suspect that Creality is going to come out with over 4 dozen X1 clones in the coming months. Are companies coming out with X1 clones? Absolutely. Of course they are. They saw what happened with the huge movement of Bambu. Of course they're going to come out with them. And Creality did with the K1. Prusa and Bambu are like Android and iOS, Linux and Windows. Both have its own strategy. Both can thrive with its approach. I mean, you're not really wrong with that though, right? Android is more open source where iOS is more closed. Linux is fully open source where Windows is not. So yeah, actually, I don't hate that analogy. That's pretty great, actually. Bambu will adopt a more pragmatic approach to dealing with the pressure brought by copycats. Okay. Good. The main market for 3D printers is in Europe and the United States. This is a well-known thing. For Bambu and Prusa, there are a variety of different effective legal tools available to address any non-compliant and illegal competitive behavior. But as Joe stated, in his article, it is incredibly expensive. And from what I can tell, Bambu is not making a lot of money, if anything, on the X1 carbon or the P1P. There's just too much that's gone into them to be making more than a couple of bucks. And while there might be some state sponsorship that is assisting them, it is very easy to burn all of your money in legal action. And companies that look at this kind of thing as a rounding error are more than happy to let smaller companies sit it out and sweat it out in court until they run out of cash. The US legal system is not conducive for this kind of thing. European might be a little bit better. I'm not too knowledgeable of it, but I know United States and litigious might as well be the same thing. And while they say they have a very open attitude towards sharing their designs and patents, I would love to have all of the designs for a Bambu X1 carbon. I've never gotten any of them, but I would love to be able to make my own replacement parts, like when my tool head cover, the magnets fell out of it. I would have loved to be able to print my own new tool head cover, embed magnets in it, and make it better. But I can't do that because the files aren't available. So no, you don't have an open attitude. And if you do, shoot me an email and send me those design files, and I'll be more than happy to pin a comment down below with a link to them for everybody to have. Because if you are going to have a very open attitude, well, then I want to see it. I like this statement here. We will not use patents as stumbling blocks for innovators, nor will we use overly broad patent claims to hinder the development of the entire industry. The rest of this really gets into who will rise above. We don't know, but I like this ending. Let the games begin, and may the odds be ever in your favor. So let's talk about this, right? Bambu is your traditional closed source, where Prusa is your traditional open source. And while I believe they both bring beneficial things to the table, I think Bambu's got a lot of things to learn. Prusa is clearly a little frustrated, and I don't blame them. I'm frustrated too. There's a lot of things that we can do as a community to be better, to hold companies accountable, and to really bring up this industry together. I like that Prusa does have an update like this, and I think it is valuable to look at a licensing model where the licenses cost $1 so that you can control those that do have access to your license, but it is not prohibitively expensive. We don't want to see that. The cat agrees. Anyways, guys, let us know what you think in those comments below. Hey guys, Future Grant here. After filming this video, we came upon a Reddit post with an individual by the name of Sufyani who said these are Bambu Lab's patents in China. Let's see about this. Now, according to Bambu themselves, we will not use patents as stumbling blocks for other innovators, nor will we use overly broad patent claims to hinder the development of the entire industry. Method, computing device, storage medium, and programming product for 3D printing. A method for 3D printing comprising placing a plurality of part models of a 3D printing project in a plurality of trays, wherein at least one part model, and saving description information describing the plurality of disks as a 3D printer project file, wherein the description information includes correspondence between the plurality? Let me know what that is in the comments. I don't know. Of part models and the plurality of disks, and a position and orientation of at least one part model within each disk. You mean a 3MF file? You mean a 3MF file? You're trying to patent this. Now, this is pending, but you say you're not going to do overly broad patents or patents as stumbling blocks for other innovators, and this is the first one that I click on? Shame on you. Now, it's pending, and this is only in China. There is not a snowball's chance in hell this holds up in any court outside of China, to be clear, with anybody else that is wondering this. So I just don't get what Bambu is going after here. They're saying that they're not going to use patents as stumbling blocks for other innovators, but they absolutely, clearly are. And this one appears to be talking all about just regular FDM printing, from what I can tell. Welcome to the patent world where things are a little bit crazy. But this was filed in November of 21. It's been a while. And this is filament. This is a hot end. This is normal 3D printing that has been around for literally decades. So, Bambu, I'm calling you out. You guys have made a claim that you will not use overly broad patent claims to hinder the development of the entire industry. What the actual hell is this? You know my email, you know how to reach me, and I want you on a podcast where you or somebody from your company that you think is a good representative can come on and talk live with me on a podcast. I will make whatever episode, whatever date, whatever time you want. You have an open invitation, and I'm calling you out because you're telling me that you're pro-consumer, that you're pro-industry, that you're even pro-Prusa. But this kind of stuff says exactly the opposite. Looking at this patent, the one for a structure and 3D printer for supporting print platform of 3D printer, it's just talking about a drive system for a triple lead screw bed. This is so unreasonably vague and has hundreds of levels of prior art. So Bambu, I'm sorry, but this whole, oh, we're for the community, we're not gonna use patents. No, I don't believe it, and neither should any of our viewers. You guys are a wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't trust you, so I'm gonna need some explanations. And in the meantime, the first person that does want to crack that encryption, I'll give you 500 bucks out of my personal account. Because at this point, I wanna know what we're sending in those log files. And I wanna be able to read them. Because as a consumer, and as someone that cares about their privacy, and as someone that cares about the privacy for their clients, I have a need to know. And blocking me from doing this is literally using closed source as a weapon. So don't sit here and give me this garbled bullshit of how you're not going to use patents as stumbling blocks. You obviously are. You're gonna use closed source as a means of compliance. Because if you don't get it from you can't get it from anybody else. I'm gonna be testing this soon. You'll see. But calling them legal weapons, like, oh, you Bruce Willis, get off of here. Now, while I recognize this might be translation things, you and Prusa are not on the same team. This is the kind of shit that Prusa doesn't do. At least currently. Maybe they choose to later on, but currently they don't. So no, you're not on the same side. You're not one and the same. And honestly, you've all lost a lot of credibility from me. You were gaining some back because this current X1 Carbon is running about a 70% completion rate, which is better than the sub 40% the last one had. But this is a whole new low. Y'all are getting filed into problems as creality in my book. I need an explanation. You have the power to explain. I've got time. And I don't sleep very much. And while these are pending, and most of them are completely never going to pass anywhere outside of mainland China, when you look at that the vast majority of manufacturing of 3D printers is occurring in mainland China right now, this is a huge problem for other companies. And companies like Creality, Elegoo, Anycubic, and others should be really paying attention to these patents that are filed and make sure that they get the legal team ready. Because I know Creality's got one. They're still fighting Artec for violations and such. Because this, Bambu's talking about a war. I think they're the ones that fired the first shot. Let me know what you guys think in those comments, because this reads a whole lot different when you have this involved as well. Let the game begin. May the odds be ever in your favor. As far as I'm concerned, I thought that was funny. Now it feels like a threat. If you are a 3D printer manufacturer, you better pump up your legal team, because they're making some really broad patent claims that if they get these passed is going to be a real problem for this industry, for the development of future 3D printers, and for companies that want to legitimately compete. Because remember, they're in a market that is famous for doing clones. Not that it's ever stopped anybody for patents, but they chose this market, so they have to make their bed because they chose to lie here. I'm not okay with this. I'm curious what you guys think in those comments below. But as far as I'm concerned, this is taunting Prusa. This isn't a, hey, we're in this together, we're gonna be competing together, let's play by the rules. No, their own promises they've already broken. So I don't know about you guys, but I certainly don't feel very good right now. I'm gonna pass it back to Past Grant, who's gonna read you out of this video. But seriously, comment below, let me know, because man, I'm pissed. And I think you should be too. Victoria and I are both really interested to hear your thoughts regarding open versus closed source, what you believe is going to be really the next best move in the industry, and where you want to see the industry move. I like open source, but I think we need some sort of change to it that really does apply some sort of, I don't know, legal ramification in case a company doesn't follow it. But that's all we have for you guys today. Stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones, pet your animals more, and as always, keep making awesome. Have a good one. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video, and a massive thank you goes out to all of our Patreon, PayPal, and YouTube channel member supporters whose names are listed right next to me at the $5 tier and higher. Remember, if you want to support the efforts that we do here, you can click those links in that description and join for as little as $1 a month. With the $10 tier, getting access to our private Discord server, you can come hang out with myself and all the other awesome Musketeers. Right below me will be our entire playlist about Prusa, and right next to that will be our entire playlist about Bambu. Go enjoy them. One of them I'm way more, actually I'm excited in both of them, but one of them is more positive, the other is more negative. Anyways, I will see you guys down in those comments and in the next one. Take care.